Well, let's see. We got Carol and Neil and Adil, Alejandro, Sarah, Heather and Susan, Dantika, good to see you, Gustavo, Ruanthi, Gustavo, Cher, Samrit, Jeff, good to see you, Shelly. Still quite a few other people that were on there. So we'll wait until we start in earnest. And give me a chance to drink my coffee. I'm not very good at talking and drinking at the same time, so. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Heather, Linda, Patty, Brandon. Welcome to Monday. We've had some nice rain, which is welcome. The leaves are washed and shiny. Good morning, David. Yes, better. Danica has a nice suggestion there. We can mix the phone ring with Guinery's drumming. So, good morning, Kathy. I'm sorry for the technical problems we had there. I was trying to make one change to the countdown clock because I had made a mistake and I'd missed the appointed time on YouTube. Was mistakenly set to 5 p.m. for this today. And when I noticed that, I went and changed that, and that must have messed something up. So in the end, we just had to sort of scrap the what was scheduled on YouTube and start fresh with this. So let's see. I'm still missing a few other people. Scott. But it's 12 after, so maybe I'll just have to go, and maybe people will figure out they can join in later or revisit the recorded version. So I might note, just for people, sometimes like maybe you might want to try to find it sort of right away after the stream's done. And for a while, Google seemed to be so overloaded with content or bandwidth that sometimes there'd be a little bit of delay playing the raw feed. And I usually have to wait a little bit of time before I can edit the feed and take off the countdown in the beginning and any extra time at the end of it, which I usually do maybe after lunch. It's usually ready, sometimes a little bit before. So if people visit the stream, the recorded version of the stream later in the day, then usually that's been kind of trimmed a little bit. So it just kind of starts with the opening and our discussion that we have. So just a short programming note. Well, I had a really interesting experience last night, a new experience, and something that is really very much on my mind this morning. I generally don't check email or respond to email late at night, but last night when I was going to shut my phone down, I saw a message from an old friend who had been a fellow monk with me in my early years in Thailand. He ordained just a short bit before I had ordained. And he left our monastic order maybe 12 years ago, so I haven't had much contact with him since then. I think the last time I saw him was a few years back when I was in England. We got to spend a bit of time together and went for a little nice walk in the English countryside. around Amravati, which is a very beautiful day. But that's the last time we spent any significant time together. And he sent an email to me and quite a few other of the monastics that he had lived with, some teachers, some monks, some nuns. And it was a very sweet and yet sad experience. He recorded what might be described as a video letter to us all. And I had just recently heard something along these lines that there was a former monk who had been diagnosed with ALS, which is a neurodegenerative disease, I believe, which is generally fatal. And this letter that he sent out to us last night was a 35-minute letter that he recorded, and just updating all of us on where he is in his life. And indeed, he was diagnosed with ALS 20 months ago, and he noted that statistically speaking, most people don't live much beyond 18 months with ALS. And he primarily wanted to catch up and share a little bit of his life, and really to say thank you for the friendships that we had. And it felt very much like a goodbye. And I often reflect on how there's different dimensions to how death and dying affects us, and one is it's the untimely. So, not to trivialize it, but last night it was time for me to go to sleep. I really shouldn't have been checking my email, but when I saw a message from him, who I rarely hear from, and read the subject line, I thought, well, I can't let this wait till the morning. And I'm glad I didn't. It was so beautiful, personal, sweet. Seems to be managing and coping with the challenge, and his process in a very admirable way, without anger or ill will. Very accepting. He mentions there's things that he was still looking forward to in his life that probably will not happen now, and at this estimation, he doesn't expect to live beyond the summer unless something radically changes. And of course, it's a little bit strange receiving this news in this time of a pandemic as well, because he's at a stage right now where his breathing is compromised from the ALS. I guess there's a couple types, and the type that he has starts at the extremities, and the nerve signals start dying out. And from the very extremities to the core, then eventually your muscles don't function. They don't have the normal impulses that they need. And so his breathing now is quite impacted by that. So for him, COVID would be an almost certain death sentence. So he was so grateful for the years he spent as a monk, and as young men, we spent a lot of time contemplating aging, illness, and death. And he was commenting on how valuable that was, and how it's come to him in this time to come to his aid and in his process and in meeting this challenge. So I'll be reaching out to him, and hopefully it won't be a final goodbye. But given the state of the world, I can't hop on a plane and go visit him, and it might not be easy to connect with him. one of the things I've been thinking about ever since this pandemic arrived, and I've heard even Ajahn Jeff and Ajahn Sona reference this teaching that I first read maybe in the first year or so I was a monk, and it's called the Simile of the Mountain. And just in brief, it's this very short sutta out of the Sutta Nikaya, out of the Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha encounters a king, and he kind of delivers something almost of a koan to the king. And I thought maybe I might even maybe try to read this because it's such a short sutta, and there's a couple features of it that keep coming back to me again for contemplation. And what triggered this again, sort of listening to this friend of mine last night talk about his disease of ALS and how it moves from the extremities, invigorated this image that is at the heart of this sutta of four great mountains as high as the clouds, moving in from the north, the south, the east, the west, crushing all, killing all. And the Buddha poses this question to the king: what would you do? How would you respond if your messengers were bringing you this news? So maybe let's see if I can read that to you now. It's very short. At Sawati, King Pasenadi of Kosala sat to one side, and the Buddha said to him, "So, great king, where are you coming from in the middle of the day?" "Sir, there are anointed aristocratic kings who are infatuated with authority and obsessed with greed for sensual pleasure. They have attained stability in the country, occupying a vast conquered territory. Today I've been fulfilling the duties of such kings. What do you think, great king? Suppose a trustworthy and reliable man were to come from the east. He'd approach you and say, 'Please, sir, you should know this. I come from the east. There I saw a huge mountain that reached the clouds, and it was coming this way, crushing all creatures. So then, great king, do what you must.' Then a second trustworthy and reliable man were to come from the west, a third from the north, a fourth from the south, and he'd approach and say, 'Please, sir, you should know this. I come from the south, and I saw a huge mountain that reached the clouds and was coming this way, crushing all creatures. So then, great king, do what you must.' Should such a desire and threat arise, a terrible loss of human life, when human birth is so rare, what would you do?" And the king's replying here, "Sir, what could I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, practice doing skillful and good actions? I tell you, great king, I announce to you, old age and death are advancing upon you. Since old age and death are advancing upon you, what would you do? Sir, what can I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? Sir, there are anointed aristocratic kings who are infatuated with authority and obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures that have attained stability in the country, occupying a vast conquered territory. Such kings engage in battles of elephants, cavalry, chariots, infantry. But there's no place, no scope for such battles when old age and death are advancing. In this royal court, there are ministers of wise counsel who are capable of dividing an approaching enemy by wise counsel. But there's no place, no scope for such diplomatic battles when old age and death are advancing. In this royal court, there is abundant gold, coin, and bullion stored in dungeons and towers. Using this wealth, we can pay off an approaching enemy. But there is no place, no scope for such monetary battles when old age and death are advancing. When old age and death are advancing, what can I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? And then the Buddha praises him. That's so true, great king. That's so true. When old age and death are advancing, what can you do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? That is what the Buddha said. And then he went on to say this. And many suttas end like this. They summarize everything up in verse form, which is quite beautiful. So I'll read that as well. It's a nice way to summarize and helps enhance memory. Suppose there were vast mountains of solid rock touching the sky, drawing in from all sides and crushing the four quarters. So too old age and death advance upon all living creatures. Aristocrats, Brahmins, merchants, workers, outcasts, and scavengers. They spare nothing. They crush all beneath them. There's nowhere for elephants to take a stand, nor chariots, nor infantry. They can't be defeated by diplomatic battles or wealth. That's why an astute person, seeing what's good for themselves, being wise, would place faith in the Buddha, the teaching, and the Sangha. Whoever lives by the teaching in body, speech, and mind is praised in this life and departs to rejoice in heaven. So I hope you don't mind my reading of that today. Oftentimes when I try to summarize or quote these suttas, there's lots of little features and gems that get kind of missed. And as it's so short, I thought it's worth a read. And there's a couple features of this that really have made it memorable for me. One Ajahn Chah himself sometimes would say to his students, if you can't go forward and you can't go back and you can't stand still, what do you do? Where do you go? And it was one of these kind of things that he apparently sort of said many times, sometimes in slightly different ways. And it's what we might call an Ajahn Chah koan. And it always reminds me of this sutta. This image is fantastic. Like, just coming out of the time of the Buddha into today, even though it violates our sense of geologic time, mountains do move. But four great mountains like that, moving at a pace that it would be something that a king would have to deal with, certainly stretches our imagination. But it's like you can easily envision such a situation, and life presents us with such situations. And I don't think this pandemic is anything quite as complete as that. But, there are many dimensions to it that are moving and closing in on us or something. Like some of the typical sort of abilities and tools that we have to throw at the various problems, even big problems that come at us, are not something that will just make this go away and allow us to dismiss this. And there's a few things that come to mind always when I think of this sutta. When I think of the way Ajahn Chah sort of offered his little koan, like when you can't move forward, can't move back, can't stand still, and someone would say, well, I go to the side. And you say, well, you can't go to the side either. What do you do? I always think, part of the wisdom in that is like he's pointing to this fundamental condition where we're always conceiving of me and mine and the future and looking for fulfillment and happiness sort of somewhere out there in the sense realm, in the realm of conditions. And, my reading is that the whole of the Buddha's teaching is to point to how that is a flawed strategy and to reorient us to look inside, to turn our focus of wishing, wanting, hoping, desiring to find fulfillment out there, to now, to the present moment, to the interior experience. And so, both in Ajahn Chah's little koan and in this image, it always reminds me that, it's considered delusion and folly to be looking for completion and satisfaction in the conditioned realm. And the kingdom and the world, the geography of this sutta or something is, to me, a symbol of that very human tendency to be looking for those things in the world of conditions. And of course, the tendency, even in a time of great challenge and trouble, is to try to fix the world. And, while I don't think the Buddha's advocating inaction or some sort of apathetic approach here, we really do have to watch this sort of tendency to try to always be fixing the world, because oftentimes the motivational structure, the desire structure that supports that is looking for something that can't be had. We're looking for completion and resolution and fulfillment in the conditioned realm in a way that it can't be found. And we're not doing this work of turning to the truly good, skillful, deeper, more secure and reliable sense of peace and freedom and satisfaction that one can find through the cultivation of Dhamma and through this process that, I sometimes refer to as spiritual maturity. So, the king is not endlessly watching CNN and reading the New York Times and trying to figure out every nth detail and degree of the impending calamity that cannot be stopped. Instead, he's turning his attention to his faith in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, or faith in awakening, the teachings that support awakening, the community of those who have awakened and devote themselves to the practice of awakening. He's accepting that this is of the nature of the conditioned realm, and accepting, that the normal things that we would throw at big problems, armies, money, skilled diplomats, or even, I don't know, maybe there's a reference in there to disinformation campaigns, like doesn't work in the end when we're facing the impending calamity of old age and death. And the appropriate response, the skillful response, is to return to and nurture our faith in awakening and devote ourselves to the teaching in body, in speech, and mind. Like that is the wise response. That is the deepest and most profound way to sort of respond to the challenges of old age and death in particular. And just one last little note about this. Like many suttas, this one ends, especially in the verse, it's pointing in the verse to this phrase that the Buddha's uttering: whoever lives by the teaching in body, speech, and mind is praised in this life and departs to rejoice in heaven. So, he's not saying, oh, if you respond in that way, O king, you'll achieve enlightenment and nibbana in this very lifetime. Instead, he's talking about one of the other praiseworthy goals of Dhamma practice, and that is rebirth in a favorable realm. And you find many teachings there. It's not something that gets a lot of airplay in Theravadan Buddhist circles in the West or Vipassana communities in the West, but it's something that's very much there in the suttas, and the Buddha discouraged the monks from thinking lowly of it. I mean, there is a hierarchy. I mean, the higher goal, the higher attainment is freedom from all suffering, but living a good life, living a skillful life, nurturing one's faith in awakening, studying the teachings, these all lay the conditions for very favorable rebirth, and there's nothing to look down upon that whatsoever. That's a very lofty and high goal, as is transcending all suffering. So it's something to sort of notice and note in reading this sutta. I saw a little bit in the comments here as I was going through this, people wondering what sutta that was, and I think somebody answered that in here. It's called the Simile of the Mountain, and that particular translation is from Bhante Sujato, who ordained just ahead of me at Wat Nanachat. We trained together there, although he spent most of his monastic life in Australia. So it is found on Sutta Central. I think it's suttacentral.net. And it's in the Samyutta Nikaya. It's called the Simile of the Mountain, which is in Linked Discourses 3. And there's some suttas on Kosala. So and this is the 25th of those. But I think if you just go to Sutta Central and search for the Simile of the Mountain, you can find that. It's a very nice short sutta, very good for contemplation. Take home that image. It's a very memorable one. And the imagery of the suttas is rich with mnemonic structures and rich with these images that help really bring these kind of teachings to life. It's so easy to imagine yourself in such a situation. And it's been on my mind for many weeks now. And that experience I had last night, listening to an old friend talking about this disease moving from his extremities towards what seems to be a certain death, really just brought it home in a whole different way for me. So I'd like to share that for your reflection this morning. And where are we with time? Well, it's already 8:40. Well, I'll take a sip of coffee, and if there's any comments or questions for me, I see there's lots in here. But if you have anything for me, I'll devote a little bit more time this morning to trying to deal with that. Okay, well, I don't see anything popping up on the screen here. So maybe it's appropriate to leave it at that. I know some people have to leave at 8:30 fairly promptly each morning, so we'll leave it at that, and I will see you tomorrow morning. Hopefully we'll have no technical glitches like this morning, and it all roll out as smoothly as it has on previous days. So please take this for your contemplation and have a nice day. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.